So let's turn to our panelists now and explore their thoughts on the issue and on climate messaging, engagement with environmental voters, and more. And I do want to mention, anticipate that Chair Harrison will be coming in at some point and will interrupt the panel, but then we'll get right back to it after we are lucky enough to have him here, because his support, ongoing support for this council's work has been just invaluable. It's a word I keep using about all the wonderful people who help us, and it's really true. So first I'm going to start with some introductions, and then we'll dive into the conversation. CeCe Grant, thank you, another originally a Mitten Stater, even if she's defected to Maryland and less snow. But she's the Director of Government Affairs for Dream.org, where she leads the organization's efforts to pass bipartisan legislation on climate change, criminal justice reform, and equity in the tech industry. An environmental policy leader, she has led efforts across the country to build strong local and statewide coalitions with community labor, faith, and environmental groups. And she has helped run a PAC that helped to flip 54 congressional seats from red to blue in the 2018 elections, which makes it a special. Woo!
Yeah.
So glad that CeCe can join us today. Jane Kleeb is the chair of the Nebraska Democratic Party, the author of Harvest the Vote, which if you haven't read, you should. I've read it twice now, and I'm going to be reading it a third time. I know I think more and learn more every time that I read it. She, as Ken Martin, the chair of the ASDC, mentioned, she was an absolutely essential leader in the fight against Keystone XL, and also is really vital in the fight against the carbon pipelines that are beginning to sprawl their way all over the Midwest and are very troubling. She also has an inspiring record of youth organizing as executive director, formerly, of the Young Democrats of America, and co-founded the Youth Council right here at the DNC. So really glad that Jane is here also. And Shasti Conrad is the newly elected Washington State Democratic Party chair, works with our vice chair, formerly, she was the chair of the King County, Washington, that's Seattle's in King County, Democratic Party, and helped to led the work to flip 6 city councils. And we all know the rubber meets the road, right? At local politics, when we're fighting on all of our progressive issues. She's an organizer, a dynamic change maker. I've been lucky to work with her on 2 different campaigns. We are so lucky to have her here and heading up the Washington State Democratic Party. So let's give all of them a round of applause. So thank you for being here. And let's dig in. So I'm wondering what your biggest takeaway was from the 2022 election and how we can apply those lessons toward 2024. And I thought we'd just start with Jane.
Okay. So, is this on? Yeah?
No. Pull forward.
Pull forward. Okay. So, I wear 2 hats. I run the Nebraska Democratic Party as their chair with our fearless executive director, Precious McKesson, in the front row. And I also, because that's a non-paying volunteer job in our state, I also run BOLD still across not only Nebraska, but several Midwest states. So we focus a lot on local elections, in particular county boards. And so we supported various county board elections, and those are so critical because of the zoning that happens with either zoning out clean energy is what's happening in a lot of rural communities, which I'm sure I'll touch on several times in my answers, or zoning in clean energy and zoning out, fossil fuel pipelines, or at least doing good setbacks. And so what I saw at the county level is that the more local you get, the more politicians are willing to talk about climate, right, and are willing to talk about the local projects that will impact people's property rights, the tribal nation sovereignty rights, water. The higher you go in the office, it's like the more disconnected they get from climate. I think some of that's because they don't know climate issues, and so they just stay away from it because they think they get in their head too much that it's about science. And I'm always trying to tell candidates, you gotta start speaking from the heart and start connecting climate change to real issues, right? So in our community in North Omaha, predominantly African-American community, they promised they were gonna close a coal plant, and now they're gonna keep that running for another 5 to 6, maybe in 10 years. They promised the community they were closing it, and now they're continuing to be open. There was not a peep from either the Democrat or the Republican running for Congress speaking on that issue. So, you know, that's what I have noticed. The trend, unfortunately, is that we got to get the higher office folks talking more about climate and connecting it to real people, real issues.
Thank you. Shasti or CeCe, want to jump in on that?
I was going to defer to the party chairs on that one.
Yeah, hello everyone. Yeah, I mean, look, we're in Washington State. Our governor is Jay Inslee, and so it makes it a little easier when the top of ticket is so behind climate as like the issue of our time. And I think certainly we saw this past year that up and down the ballot, our candidates were winning on climate. They were talking about it. And I think that what we're seeing is that folks may not call it climate justice, or they may not talk about it in those terms, but they want to know, how are we going to respond to increasing floods, droughts, wildfires, the things that are happening in their communities that they are facing. They are concerned, and it's impossible to not recognize that these things are exponentially increasing and getting more intense every year as we continue to not fully address climate change. And I think people want to know how we are going to respond and make a difference in their actual everyday lives. You know, what are we as a party, what are we as Democrats, what are we as elected officials going to do? We can keep talking about it sort of generally, but they want to know the action. They want to know the specificity of what is the plan, like you were talking about in the community of like, we have this actual like pipeline disaster that is happening. We have this, factory that is increasing carbon emissions here or whatnot. They want to know how we're going to address that. And then what is the timeline for it, right? Are we going to handle it now, or are we going to keep kicking the can down the road and pushing it back? So I think folks just really want to know that we have an actual action plan, and we're going to address it and not just continue to talk about it in general terms and push it to the next generation.
Thank you. This next question, I'm going to ask Shasti to kick us off with the conversation. We saw incredible turnout among youth voters in 2022. I mean, in my own hometown, the college students at the University of Michigan were literally wrapped 3 times around the building where they were voting in the cold. We had Democrats delivering pizzas to them to keep them going, and they stayed in line till every last one of them could vote. And I know that was a story that happened all over the country, right? I'm seeing lots of nods. So it's one of the reasons we had our historic midterms, and we know that the environment and climate are key issues for this voting bloc. So how can we keep them motivated? And I say them, they are part of us. And Paul is smiling. He does incredible work on that. How do we keep them motivated, engaged, and sure they turn out in 2024? Shasti?
Yes, definitely. And I think my amazing Vice Chair David Green was saying earlier about how the data keeps showing us that this is a top issue for Gen Z. There's no doubt about that. We can, I think, sort of put it to rest as a question, right? And so now what folks are looking for is action. And also, I think, honestly, to kind of get out of the way and allow Gen Z to lead. It's one thing when we sort of talk about it in terms of, oh yes, we're so excited that the youth are part of this work, or yes, it's really important that we try to get young people to vote, but actually letting them lead and like having them at the table, like having someone here that there's a designated seat, that it's not tokenizing, there's actually a voice, that we're actually listening to the ways in which they want to lead, and it's going to look different than how we have tended to lead. We also have to go where youth are spending their time. And oftentimes that turns into conversations around just social media, but actually going to where to campuses, right? Making sure that we are making connections with the college Democrats and the high school Democrats, and that we're looking to them to take up this issue. And, like I said, just get out of the way. I think it's really important that we let youth know that their voice is important, that there's wisdom to be gained from folks who have been doing this work for decades and decades, but they know that this is the issue of their lifetime. and they're coming with a fervor and a passion that we can learn from, and that we can really, I think, harness to turn this movement into something that is more than just talking points, but actual action.
Thank you. Anyone else?
And I think my mouth is big enough, but I'll use the mic, but I don't think So, I love the second question. I think what I was so excited about last year is Democrats finally understood the power of being a single issue voter, right? For the past 20 years, we've watched Republicans run on gays, gods, and guns, right? And we have been so personality focused, we never really hyper focused on issues. The last election stunned America because a bunch of young people came out because there's an issue. And I think that is a lesson for us as Democrats. If you really want infrequent and unengaged voters to come out and vote, you have to give them something to vote about. Because we get lackadaisical because we think nothing is going to change. And it wasn't until the right to control our own bodies got taken away from us that there was a wake-up call. Whoa, okay, we can't do this. This was an election we couldn't just sit out just to prove a point, right? And what I am actually seeing, and I know people love talking about young people and climate change, it's becoming a generational thing now. As a matter of fact, the very last polling that I saw was actually Generation X. That's me, y'all.
Yeah, that's me too. Hey.
MTV. Outside of has the second highest engagement level on climate change. And so, I think the lesson is, while we're going into 2024, what are people really, really passionate about? Well, yeah, people, and I'm gonna try not to get into question number 3, but the alarm is being sounded around climate change now. At one point last year, I was going around speaking all over the country, and I was like, a third of our country is on fire, a third of our country is underwater. People are starting to see the climate crisis now. And so I don't think we have to manufacture anything. I think we just have to help people connect the dots, because people are fed up, they're panicking. Colorado is out of order. And I think we have been warning about the climate crisis, but now the climate crisis is here. We have to sharpen our messaging and our focus and our outreach to talk to regular people who aren't like us, card-carrying Democrats who read the paper every single day and watch CNN news every day. Hone our message to them, because the momentum is shifting our side. I think something like 8 to 10% of Republicans refuse to vote for the presidential candidate. Let's go all the way in, y'all. Let's go all the way in on this. So the motivation and the engagement is just being honest, being transparent, and staying focused on what people are afraid of every single day. And that's loss of bodily autonomy, that's being able to have water to drink. And we're not even going to talk about the housing crisis, because that is not just piano.
I'll also just say really quickly before we get to question 3 is we need more young people running for office and state parties supporting those young people. And so Justin Pearson is a perfect recent example in Memphis, Tennessee. He was the key pipeline fighter against the Byhalia pipeline that was running through predominantly African-American communities using eminent domain on land that had been in folks' hands for over 100 years. He won that pipeline fight, and then he turned around and ran for a special election. Some elders of the party were telling him, don't run. There's other older folks who have essentially been waiting their turn. Justin went door to door the same way he went door to door to fight that pipeline, and he won. So I think we need to really lift up young people running for office, not just being campaign staffers.
This next question, we're going to start, ask CeCe to kick it off. With Republicans and in many cases climate deniers, delayers, and disruptors in charge of key committees in the House, How can we ensure we keep momentum going and don't allow them to erase the progress that we've made and are making?
I was having so much fun running our National Common Ground on Climate campaign, and then they made me government affairs, and then this Congress got elected. So I am going to try not to cry. I will say there's two bright spots, and then I'll tell the good news before the bad news. The one sliver of a bright spot in the House GOP takeover of the House of Representatives is I'm actually in regular conversations with Kathy McMorris Rogers. She is asking for Democratic inputs on her legislation that she's going to be introducing next month. It's still not going to be good, it's not going to be IRA, but the fact that she is overtly engaging big greens for them to weigh in on her legislation, I think is a silver lining. But overwhelmingly, and the other small sliver is there are 70, last Congress, there are 70 House Republicans who have signed on to the House Conservative Climate Caucus. And Chairman Curtis from Utah got 70 House Republicans to agree that climate change is real and it's occurring. That's the end of the good news.
About time.
We're in the 90s.
Because their solutions to climate change is, let's just do natural gas instead of coal. I'm sorry, that's not zero emissions. And let's do, I just sit there and I'm like, have you listened to any scientists before you propose? And so it's hard because the Republican Party is bought and paid for by the fossil fuel industry. The amount of money that people are being bought off of is literally atrocious. That is why the local candidates get it, because they're living it, they're seeing it, they're dealing with it in their communities every day. Congress, they go into DC and these people give them $1, $2, $3 million for their PAC check. They're literally buying our future. I mean, they're buying the demise of our country. And so, they were doing a study on what we're gonna do with the climate crisis, and I'm negotiating with them. And I'm like, it's gotta be about clean energy, clean energy, clean energy, clean energy. And they're like, yes, CeCe. And then they put out a plan with LNG and natural gas. And I'm like, y'all, this is not what we talked about. I will say the way we win is to go around Congress. I was literally about to hug Jane. It's the county level, it's the local level. Those are the electeds that we have to get on board because it's just too much money in Washington, D.C.
And there's just so much magical thinking happening right now in DC where they're throwing around terms of net zero, and what they mean by that is now funding this whole new slew of projects of the carbon capture. And it sounds great on paper, right? We're gonna capture the carbon so it doesn't go up into the air, but it's really just magical thinking, right? So they are gonna capture carbon and then they're gonna create 60,000 miles I would say that Republicans are selling your land to the highest bidder, and the highest bidder is fossil fuel corporations. That's what I usually say, especially in rural communities or in redder communities. And I often talk about land justice, that when we are stopping fossil fuel projects, it's about land justice for all, not only the folks who would carry the burden of the pollution of those fossil fuel projects, but also making sure that tribal nations are getting land back, that African Americans whose land was stolen from them as well is getting their land back, and that all is all part of climate change. And so those are usually the two kind of messaging points that I use.
Thank you.
So we did a lot of polling on climate change in swing states last year, and we chose North Carolina, Miami, Florida, and Arizona for obvious reasons. And so the Florida polling was the most interesting because Miami has a lot of Cubans are Republicans, right? So literally 60% of the people who, and I said polling, we actually did a deep canvas. 6% of the people who we knocked on the door said that they weren't concerned about climate change. What we did was started connecting the issues we know that's impacting them to climate change, the flooding, the constant flooding in Miami. Are you concerned about that? Oh, yes. You know, the days are getting hotter. You're spending more on your utility bills. Oh, God, yes. By the time we finished the deep canvas connecting climate change to their table issues, their pocketbook issues, literally 1/3 of those Republicans signed up for our email list to become activists. So the message is, this is a pocketbook issue. No one wants to pay a $300 light bill. I don't care what party you're at. No one wants to pay $4 or $5 gasoline. I don't care what party you are. Talk to them about how climate change is hurting their families, hurting their pocketbooks. And yeah, if you're a landowner, I mean, the appalling things, you know, that is happening. But how much money you can save on solar? I mean, the Republicans eat this up. And I've been doing this in South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia. It's 100%. Yeah, 100%.
The only thing I would add is just, I think, following that through line exactly, which is that, you know, when folks are going through these crises, it's like, well, would you like help from the government? And then following that through to say, well, guess what? It's Democrats. Democratic politicians are actually helping, and they're the ones who are actually like making sure that the money and whatnot is coming into your community. And I think you have to start at the like help part of it and not saying big capital D Democrat initially, but then reaching the point where we're reminding folks that it's us, it's our party that is actually helping and cares and is there in these moments of crisis. And I think that's really important to highlight.
And by the way, 64% of all Americans, and we know 64% of all Americans are not Democrats, 64% of all Americans think that we should transition to clean energy. 64%. We're losing the fight.
And that's shifted a lot.
Yes.
Of course, I mean, you know, connecting also the climate, making sure we are talking about that the climate crisis is here and now, not that it's off in the future, and making that kitchen table issue is absolutely vital. So just underscoring everything all three of you said. Thank you. So let's talk about organizing climate voters. Lots of organizers here in the room. How can we as, you know, a council, how can state parties, how can NGOs double down ahead of 2024 and 2023 actually? And who would like to kick that off?
I mean, okay, I'll kick you both are looking at me. So one, I think, you know, in each of your states, you should identify a couple projects that are threatening local communities that you can connect it to climate. Texas, obviously the electric grid now not coming through yet again is another perfect example and issue that you could be talking about in Texas. And then I think it's important that we're training Democratic candidates to talk about these issues so they're so not nervous about bringing up climate and connecting it to local issues. I think that they're still living in the early 2000s when climate was like a niche issue that maybe people only thought that if you wore Patagonia, you know, jackets that you cared about, but that this is now an issue that Black, brown, white, urban, rural, suburban folks care about. And so that's really important for me, is that's how we can prep in 24, is identifying a couple issues in your state that candidates can talk about and then training candidates to talk about them.
What Jane said.
So,
And I would just say we have to continue partnering with the grassroots and not being afraid. I mean, the reason why this council exists is partially because the Sunrise Movement, really pushed to mobilize here. And sometimes it's uncomfortable because they're staging protests in, Nancy Pelosi's office, and sometimes it makes some of our folks feel like there's some divide here, but there isn't. And in fact, President Biden unified the party, I think, in 2020, in part by embracing those activists, embracing that there's a space for them to be pushing and moving us along. And we need that kind of energy. And instead of trying to quell it or making it seem like it's bad or something that needs to be controlled, actually saying thank you for coming along and pushing us and being the wind at our backs to do the right thing.
Thank you so much. So we have time for maybe 2, at most 3, depending on how quick we are, questions from the audience. And then what I'm going to ask you, if we don't get to your question, would you write it down for us and leave it, and we'll try to get a response to you, because our time is short. And when you ask your question, if you would stand up and say your name, your organization, something really quick, and then quick question, that would be great. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm Mary Sullivan from Vermont, and when I was in the legislature, I co-chaired the Climate Solutions Caucus. The question that I have, and I have some thoughts on this, is when you say, all of these Republicans signed on to this, how do we get people to actually, where their passions are, where their votes, where their beliefs are, how to make sure that the candidates they're voting for actually reflect that? And that's the most frustrating thing to me.
And that is the other reason why Jane is right. No, not right. Who is a Congress? Someone who is a state rep, right? Who is a state rep? Someone who ran for local office, right? We build a pipeline. I mean, that's what they're doing. That's how they get all these crazy people in office. We focus on building climate leaders at the state and local level. At the local and county level, and then just move them up. And so that they, that's the best way to get climate champions in Congress, is to start at the state and local level.
I think some of maybe in urban communities we're making those connections, but I don't think in rural communities we are. And so you have voters who, I think liberals like to say that, rural or Republicans are voting against their best interests. I never use that language, because it's like, who am I to say, what your best interests are? I do think that there are often times when Republican voters are choosing folks that are then doing everything they can to work against people's best interests in their land, in their water, in their livelihoods. And so I think the more that we are explaining that very clearly to voters at the doors, in mailers, on phones, in texts, is the really critical thing. I do think that scorecards help, but it's not only the message, it's the messenger. And so I'm not sure League of Conservation Voters or Sierra Club is best in all communities. There's usually a local group, right? Even if it's a farmers union local council, that could be the messenger.
right.
Morning, I'm Otto Lee from California. I want to ask about the counterpoint regarding solar, for example. There's a lot of words about how the mining of the metals to make the solar panels. There's always that counterpoint. What's a good source for us to counter the BS that's coming on the other side, saying that going to solar is going to damage the environment?
So there is byproducts that's not very sustainable, even in the clean energy. And it just is what it is. There are downsides to the mining for batteries to go to EVs. There's downsides for the mining for things that go on solar panels. There is nothing pure in this planet. What we can focus on, if we let climate scientists take the lead on this, is there are always continuing building new technology to make things cleaner, better, more sustainable. And so let's just trust the technology. Let's just trust that just like cars 20 years ago aren't as safe as the cars they are today, right? Let's be patient and wait for the technology to catch up so that we can build solar and electric vehicles and wind farms that has more sustainable sourcing, because we can't do nothing. Like, doing nothing is not an option.
And I usually acknowledge that, yes, it is true that wind and solar, the creation of wind and solar does have some environmental impact. It's nowhere near the environmental impact of fossil fuel corporations. I'm obviously speaking from a red state rural perspective, but I immediately also talk about how fossil fuel corporations take permanent easements and take land by eminent domain from folks, and wind and solar don't have eminent domain rights and never take a permanent easement, and they pay landowners every year versus a one-time measly payment, which doesn't even pay for liability insurance. And I usually also say that, look, the information that you're seeing on Facebook about wind and solar being bad for the environment or killing birds is being generated by fossil fuel corporations. And so don't let them misinform you. So that's how I usually talk about it.
And some of the same sources are now claiming that dead whales that are washing up the beaches are the result of our offshore wind. But it is important, I think, to acknowledge the truth and acknowledge that it may disproportionately impact Native communities if we are not really careful. There's some really good research that's just come out from Thea Rio Francos about how we can minimize impacts, ensure that we're getting input from the communities that are going to be most impacted, and that there are ways to use less lithium, for example, going forward if we're thoughtful about how we do it. So that's the other part of it, is the sort of the technical side and also the community input side. So we're going to do one more question, and then I'm going to go to R.L. Miller, our good friend.
So I run Climate Hawks Vote. I'm also a DNC member. I run Climate Hawks Vote. We put out a ballot guide. I surveyed all 50 states, all of the state legislators running on the Democratic ticket. That was over 5,000 of them, looking at their websites and their social media. And I can tell you that less than 10 people at the state level were running on a carbon tax, a Green New Deal, or the Inflation Reduction Act. Nobody is running on the Inflation Reduction Act. And I look at what a massive bill this was, how much we all fought to put it over the finish line, and how it's gonna be awesome. And nobody is running on it yet. I'd like to know, what can the DNC do about that? What can we do in the way of like training people how to run on this awesome thing that the Biden administration has done?
Well, as someone who's run a couple of congressional races, I will tell you why. There is polling done before a candidate messages on anything. They're going to poll their districts. They're going to see what the people in their districts care the most about, and that's what they're going to run on. So if people don't understand how important the IRA is, it's not going to poll well, and you're not going to get a candidate running around talking about stuff that people don't know, or people don't understand, or people don't care about. So that is an education, challenge that, the White House has, and basically selling the important impacts of the IRA. It's not there, and candidates aren't going to run on things that they can't win on.
Did you have a follow-up on that?
Hi, my name is Aisha Richardson. I'm a PA State Committee member. Welcome to Philadelphia.
Thank you.
Sure. So I wanted to ask about those talking points. And this researcher out of Columbia, Diana Hernandez, has been doing research on energy insecurity. And that is the cost of heating your home and water and electricity has gotten so bad that there are people who don't have any of it. And I know that because I work in the state legislator's office, and I also deal with constituents that don't have water, that don't have electricity, that don't have heat. And so they are borrowing things, they're showering other places, they are using illegal electrical hookups, and it's a huge problem. I hear from seniors desperate for fuel oil for their homes, desperate. So I think that some of the talking points can be focused in on those pocketbook issues, right? And so it is the cost of the production of energy that is impacting people's ability to access energy, right? So I think that if we talk about those things and we talk about some of the tax credits and how we can talk to seniors about, changing out their boilers, their oil heaters for something else, something more energy efficient. How do we get people off the grid? Then we can talk about IRA, right? We can talk about running on IRA, but until we talk to people about their pocketbook issues and their, like you said, their kitchen table issues, it's going to be difficult for candidates to then go and talk about these things as well.
If I could quit my job today and do one thing for the next 5 years, it would be community solar. The ability to
Yes.
people to produce their own energy free would literally be a game changer. And to that point, if we could ever get the fossil fuel industry to stop buying out politicians so we can implement community solar, it would be a game changer for so many marginalized, economically marginalized families and homes. It would just be a life-changing thing.
I want to talk to you because we got a lot of vacant land in Philadelphia, and that community solar piece would be amazing for folks in Philly.
I would like to say something. You keep talking about how local level, how small rural areas, how everything that has to be there. I'm grassroots. I'm the county chair in a small town on the border of Texas. And I just have to share this feel-good story real quick, I promise. Dos Republicas Coal Mine Company, above surface coal mining, not even a mile away from an elementary school where I actually worked. And so we founded this Maverick County Environmental and Public Health Association. We got active. We shut them down. And they're shut them down. And how funny that 2 commissioners we got elected that were actual officers in the Maverick County Environmental and Public Health Association. And I'm here bursting and saying, I'm just from a small county. I'm just a guest here. This is my first time. And you all are talking about us at that level and what we can do and how we can work. And I'm very proud of my daughter, by the way. She's a big environmentalist, Dr. Adriana Martinez. Anyway, but I just have to share that with you all and let you know that we are working and we are activists. And, on top of being the president of that organization that we shut down the coal mines, I am the chair and I'm here representing the border because the battle's on the border with the Republicans. We're fighting against them.
Yes.
My name is Charles Degnan. I live in Unalakleet, Alaska. I have served in the Alaska legislature. And, our state is huge with very few people. And tribes live all along the coast and river sections. And we are ignored from, what do you call it? We're unemployable because the way the nepotism law is written and how it's enforced. And so in order to be a professional, you have to move away from your own community. And so they're drawing people out of the small communities. And it's a way of discriminating against tribal members. And it's hard to explain. And it's hard to look at people and tell them that's what's happening because it's hard to believe. Because how do you treat people that way? But our family has been dealing with that since in traders coming in to the communities. And our people welcome people and train them how to live in village, how to feed themselves, how to help each other out, and that's how the things got started. We are in a different time, And one of the things that we had to fight real hard for is translation from English to local languages and back. And the government, through the U.S. Army, said English only. And so then you have all the different religions from the different places that said only that way.
Yeah.
So it's really hard for me as a citizen of my tribe, citizen and veteran, to talk about this. It's getting down to very basic things. So what my family taught me as I was growing up, to what they said: watch out, look, evaluate, situational awareness, respond to what's going on now. Don't wait for tomorrow, do it now. And so this is the way we have to operate the elections, is do it now. When you see a problem, bring it up and address it, no matter how bad it hurts you to admit that's what's going on. It's interesting. One person asked me, how do you deal with it? I said, in a way, it's really fun.
Thank you so much, Chuck, and thank you for your warm welcome to the council when we were able to visit Alaska. So out of respect for everyone's time, because there are other meetings beginning that I know people want to attend, I'd like us to give a big hand to our amazing panelists. So grateful. And from my heart, a big thank you to all of you.